Russell Davis will miss the 2025 season. That's a big hit to Washington's defensive line depth.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as all that really does help the channel out a lot. Now, I got a really fun show coming at all you everydayers out there today. I wanted to spend a little time having a little fun talking about the NFL, and I got some bold predictions for guys like Michael Penix, Rome Odunze, and some other pro Huskies around the league, but we'll get to those at the end of the show because I want to talk about everything related to Big Ten Media Day. Unfortunately, that means a couple of season-ending injuries. We'll talk about Rahim Wright, what that means for the defensive backs room, along with a couple other guys a little bit later on, because the biggest news coming out of Las Vegas on Wednesday, according to a report from our good buddy Christian Cable over at On Lake, is that Russell Davis, the edge rusher who transferred in from Arizona ahead of the 2024 season, is set to miss 2025 with a patellar tendon injury. And this is a really unfortunate loss for Washington. Obviously, Russell Davis didn't get to play a lot last year either, as once he transferred in from Arizona, he missed 9-10 games last season with a couple of different injuries, including a torn tricep, which he suffered after his breakout 3-sack game against UCLA, and for which he won Defensive Player of the Week from the Big Ten. So it's no secret, this is a really, really big hit to Washington's defensive line depth in what's going to be a very different scheme under defensive coordinator Ryan Walters, where we talked about it a lot on this show, right? You look at it, and there's going to be 3 interior defensive linemen. One of them is supposed to be more of a true nose tackle kind of guy, and then a couple of 3-5 technique defensive tackles. Think Anterio, Thompson, Bryce Butler, Jayvon Parker is probably going to move a little bit more towards that nose position this year, but his brother Armon is probably going to play in one of those roles as well. And it's something where this defensive front is all about creating one-on-one matchups. And you look at this edge rusher, which is now an outside linebacker position under Ryan Walters. Russell Davis was a guy who was really expected to give you some kind of production this year. Again, after having 3 sacks last year in a year where Washington only had 20 as a team, this is a really, really big hit. Remember, 7 of those sacks came against Eastern Michigan, and then 3 more of those sacks came from Russell Davis against UCLA. So taking away just those 2 games, Washington only had 10 other sacks last season across 13 games. That is just an abysmal number that needs to change this year. And obviously, a lot of that was out of Washington's control last year, right? In terms of some of the depth we saw after Jayvon Parker went down to the torn Achilles against Rutgers, after Zach Durfee missed a good majority of the season with turf toe in both his feet. Having those guys back in some kind of capacity, which I'll get into in a little bit, will certainly help out a little. But this is a guy who, no matter what his role was going to be, no matter how big or small, this is a position where Washington can't afford a lot of bad injury luck once again this season. And I look at outside linebacker in particular, where I think Zach Durfee is going to be penciled in at one of those starting spots. On the other side, Davis was a guy who I think was in the running to start at that position. I don't think he was going to win that battle coming out of fall camp necessarily. I look at guys like Isaiah Ward as someone who I think Jedd Fisch has high hopes for on the outside. I look at Deshawn Lynch as somebody who's going to play a lot this season, especially against some of those bigger teams that are going to try to run the ball early and often. But I think Russell Davis, again, as somebody who proved that he can have a lot of production as a pass rusher, was somebody who was going to step into a much larger role this season. And it was going to be really fun to kind of watch that guy progress. And Jacob Lane is somebody else who I think is now going to be just somebody who needs to step up in an even larger role following this injury, where Jacob Lane is someone I think is going to be, I don't want to say the biggest benefactor, because that's never probably the right term to use when talking about somebody who just suffered an injury, but just the guy who's going to have to step into the most important role following this news, because he is somebody who, at his size, being 6'5", 255, 260 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark, is someone who has the ability to play on all three downs. He's got the size, he's got the athleticism, he knows how to set the edge against the run and turn running backs back inside. He's got the ability to not necessarily bend around the edge, but he has a couple of different pass rush moves that I like, that I've seen him show over his freshman and sophomore year, that can help him collapse the pocket, get to the quarterback, and put some pressure on opposing passers with some form of regularity, which again is something we didn't see last year. And when talking about what the interior of this defensive line is going to look like, having somebody who can win those one-on-one matchups on the edge is going to be really, really important. And while I think Zach Durfee is the guy who Washington is going to have to lean on the most in that regard, having somebody else, Isaiah Ward, Jacob Lane, Deshawn Lynch, Hayden Moore, whoever else it might be, in some form of regularity that can win as a pass rusher is going to be absolutely critical. And I think there's one other guy that we need to throw into this mold, and it's somebody who we saw have some success in various forms at Arizona, both on the interior and out on the edge, and that's Uiagalelei, one of Washington's 3 defensive line transfer portal acquisitions. And he's somebody who during spring practice, he lined up a lot at that 5 technique that I was talking about a little bit earlier, that we'll see a couple of other guys play. And if somebody else, whoever it be, Alinius Davis, Bryce Butler, Omar Khan even, if one of those guys can step up and take a much bigger role on the interior of the defensive line, that's something where I've talked about it a lot over the course of the summer. Having the depth that Washington has been able to show after, acquiring all these guys through the transfer portal and having a couple of guys get healthy, Omar Khan having another year in the system, having all of these guys readily available, Armon Parker, again, being another one as well, having all these guys available is so, so important, and it can allow for this flexibility. And it's why I really like the pickup of Uiagalelei at the time, where he's somebody who he has had 45 pressures over the last 2 seasons at Arizona, and those have come from a variety of different alignments along the defensive front. So he's somebody who at 6'4", 280 pounds, he can end up being a really solid edge setter against the run for you out at that outside linebacker spot. And if you think that he's not going to get as much pressure there and you want to kick him inside and have Isaiah Ward take his place on some of these pass rush sets, great. That's a way that you can find a way to just make up for what has truly been an unfortunate loss for someone who last season proved he has all the talent necessary to succeed in the Big Ten and was expected to be a really, really big part of what you wanted to do in terms of disruption this season. And at the end of the day, it all comes back to one thing. This is why defensive line recruiting is so, so important. Obviously, it's critical at every position because this is football and injuries do happen on a yearly basis, but especially along the defensive line, Russell Davis is someone who I know some fans were relying on to take that big step forward this season. And the coaching staff really seemed to like having a bigger role this fall as well. And with an injury like this, it's always really helpful when you can say, oh, well, we've got this 4-star guy waiting in the wings, or we have this former highly recruited guy in whatever way. And I'm not saying that Washington doesn't have that. I like what Caleb Smith and Victor Sanchez Hernandez, the 2 incoming true freshmen that are going to end up playing a lot on the exterior, are going to be. But it's something where when you have that on a year in, year out basis, and you look at where this 2026 class is right now, you've got a cornerstone in Derek Coleman-Brusa, but it's about stacking that talent on a year in, year out basis. And obviously when this coaching staff came into Washington after the mass exodus that took place following Kalen DeBoer's departure, it's a little bit harder to put that together, but it's just signaling what you need to do in this 2026 class and what you need to continue to do moving forward. Because when you're able to stack talent at this position especially, you see how that pays off for teams like Michigan, like Ohio State, like Penn State. And if you want to be able to compete with them on a year in, year out basis in the Big Ten, recruiting on the defensive line at a very high level is so important, because when injuries like that happen, you can take that next man up mentality and you can just say, all right, we know we've got so much other talent waiting in the wings, and it's a chance for, X player or Y player to prove himself this upcoming fall. And unfortunately, that's not the only injury that Washington is dealing with ahead of fall camp. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing. And whether you're all about baseball under the lights, just like me, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. And if you want some great action this season, I would go check out Washington's win total over on FanDuel. The line right now is 7.5 wins this season, and I think Washington's going to hit the over. Check out my conversation with my buddy Spencer McLaughlin over at Locked On College Football for more, because I love the way the schedule shapes up. Washington's got some top-end All-American talent returning in Jonah Coleman, in Denzel Boston, and a promising young quarterback in Damon Williams. And I think all of that, plus the way the schedule lines up, means 8 wins. Yeah, I love that line. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Unfortunately for Washington, Russell Davis isn't the only player that's going to miss the 2025 season, as Jedd Fisch also told Christian Capel that redshirt freshman defensive back Rahim Wright is also set to miss the year. This is a guy who I was really impressed with during fall camp last year. He's someone who Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff were really high on during their time in Arizona, and obviously asked him to follow them up here to Washington. And he's a guy who was a really nice athlete. Down in his time in Southern California, is one of the state's top jumpers, I believe, in both triple and high jump, if I'm not mistaken. But he's someone who I looked at and I thought was going to find a way to break into the rotation this year. He played a little bit of nickel during his one appearance as a true freshman against Weber State, and was someone who I didn't think was necessarily going to overtake anybody at the nickel right now, with Rashawn Clark as the penciled-in starter, and then Dyson McCutcheon most likely behind him in the second string role. But he was someone who I thought might have a role at safety. And everything that's going on in this situation with Rahim Wright, I think it only does one thing, and that's emphasizes the need for a guy like Rylan Dillard-Allen. I talked about recruiting last year and what it means to consistently have that depth available from the high school ranks and someone who might need to step into a role early. And this is exactly what I expected Rylan Dillard-Allen to do anyways. When I just kind of look at his profile, look at what he was coming out of Mountain Point High School in Arizona, and as somebody who he ran with the second team defense a lot during spring practice anyway, and as someone with the athletic ceiling that he has with a 4.28 40-yard dash that was reported during his time in high school, he's someone who, again, ran a lot with the second team defense as it was, and was someone that I believe was competing with Rahim Wright for a spot. Where I look at how the defense plays out right now, and especially at safety, and McEllisteen and CJ Christian seem to be the two penciled in starters, in my opinion. And then behind that, it's Alex McLaughlin, and just kind of a toss up where Rahim Wright was kind of in the mix with Paul Menke and Rylan Dillard-Allen for that last spot. And I think now that spot will end up going to Dillard-Allen. And I think Vincent Holmes is going to give both those guys a good run for their money as well. But I look at what he brings to the table, again, especially athletically, and what he can bring on special teams, being a guy who, with that speed, can be utilized as a gunner. I already expected him to end up burning his red shirt this upcoming season, and this just kind of seals that for me. Where when I expected Rahim Wright to move around the formation, I think that's something that you can do with Rylan as well, but he's probably going to end up being best in the long term as a true center fielder kind of guy. Probably how we're going to see McEllisteen utilized for the majority of his time on the field this upcoming season. So I feel like that's where we're going to see him play the most whenever he is out there. So I look at that, just where Washington's secondary is as a whole right now. And this is still a significant loss, but I think it's one that Washington has recruited well to find a way to maneuver around. Whereas on the defensive line, there are still some questions that need to be answered. But that being said, let's go back to the defensive line conversation for a minute here, because in Christian's report, which you can go check out over on Onmont, highly recommend subscribing to him. He does phenomenal work over there. There were updates on a couple of defensive linemen, namely Jayvon and Armon Parker, where Jayvon, we talked about him on yesterday's show, is still coming off a torn Achilles that he suffered late last September against Rutgers, while Armon has just been dealing with a host of injuries throughout his career on Montlake. And Jedd Fisch said that both of them will be working in some individual drills and some limited off to the side team reps, which we saw a bunch of guys do over the course of spring practice, where it's a lot of strength work with various members of the strength and conditioning staff. So I think that's a good sign for Jayvon. And for somebody like Armon, who participated in spring practice, maybe he got a little bit nicked up during summer workouts, as it's obvious a couple of other guys did, it's probably a good way to keep him safe and try to make sure that he's healthy and ready for the start of the regular season, because he's someone who I know Andy Yamashita over at the Seattle Times mentioned as a potential breakout player this season. That's something that I've been saying on the show as well for a while, because he's got all the talent to find a way to make an impact in some of these one-on-one matchups that I talked about in terms of what he can do on the interior of this defensive front. And if he can return to the form that he was pre-injury, where he was the more heralded recruit between he and his brother, and obviously his brother has had a lot of success so far during his college career, if he can find a way to regain that form, Washington will have a real weapon on the interior of the defensive line, especially when you combine him with everybody else like Elinius Davis, who I think is the guy who's the most prepared to take a big step forward this fall. And if we see that come to fruition, it's something that could be a major impact for this defensive line that needs to do a better job of stopping the run, needs to do a better job of getting after the passer after finishing 15th in both of those marks last season. 15th against the run, allowing 161.8 yards per game, and 15th in sacks as well, getting just 20. So I look at both those guys as ways to not necessarily mitigate the injuries, but just add so much extra reinforcements and so much extra talent to a group that certainly needs as much as it can get. And another guy who's going to do that as well is Zach Durfee, where Zach Durfee, it's really great to hear that after he missed the spring, while still recovering from the toe surgery that he had over the offseason, I believe his surgery was actually right before Washington's bowl game against Louisville in El Paso. So it's nice that he's had 7-8 months to recover from that at this point in time. And it sounds like going into camp, there are going to be no restrictions, no limitations on him, which is fantastic news. And it's something that, again, it's why the Russell Davis news hurts so much, because if Zach Durfee does take a big step forward and he does start commanding double teams from teams leaving a tight end in the block, or just commanding 2 offensive linemen on any amount of plays, that's something that does nothing but work to the benefit of everybody else in the room, and why it's so important that Washington has these guys that can win in one-on-one matchups. A guy that, like I just highlighted Russell Davis on the edge, a guy that I think can do that on the interior is someone like Anterio Thompson, who has just shown so much pure strength throughout spring practice, and is someone who I think is going to continue to do that this fall. And if you can get those kinds of consistent contributions from the defensive line, you are going to be in a much better spot than you were last year. And it's something where we saw the flashes that Zach Durfee brings to the table. He had 2.5 sacks against Eastern Michigan in week 2 last season. And it was just, it felt like that was going to be the breakout game. That was going to be the moment that everything's just that switch flip for Zach after having to deal with the NCAA for the entirety of 2023. And then unfortunately, he gets rolled up on, as he told us during spring practice, and just everything has continued to go awry for him from there. But he's got a major opportunity to get back on track this fall. I feel like you can say that for a couple of other guys as well, where it sounds like Denzel Boston is going to be limited, at least for the first week or two, where there weren't a whole lot of specifics, but it does sound like that's just based on the offseason cleanup surgery, as Jedd Fisch coined it, which came in just late December, early January following the Sun Bowl. So he's someone who I'm not concerned about his health long-term. It sounds like that'll only limit him for a week or two. And by the time the season rolls around, he's going to be full go, which is great news. And I feel like you can also say that about the linebacker position. It sounds like no decisions have been made, and this is all coming from Christian's report, about Jacob Manu and Zaydrius Rainey-Sale, 2 of those inside linebackers who I think can be really productive in a variety of ways, where Jacob Manu is someone who can be a really, really nice backstopper, even potentially a starter ahead of Buda Alukta, because he's got that kind of talent and showed that as a 2023 All Pac-12 first teamer. That's somebody who it doesn't sound like a decision has been made on his red shirt yet, which is something I've been just hammering home here on Locked On Huskies, because I look at a guy like Jacob Manu and he still has a red shirt available. So if you want to find a way to just ease him back into action this season, he plays in 4 games and then he's full go in 2026 and you still have some veteran depth at the position, that's fantastic. But if he's ready to play and he's playing at high level like he was before he went down last season, that's also great news, because that's just another guy who can really help you in run defense. And as for Zaydrius Rainey-Sale, obviously the number one prospect in Washington's 2025 class is someone who I've expected to play a lot as a true freshman until we learned about his torn ACL that he suffered at the end of his high school season. And if he's ready to play, that's fantastic. He's someone who can also help mitigate that Russell Davis loss in certain aspects because he's shown that he brings the speed and power necessary to rush the passer off the edge, but he also just has the range and tackling ability needed to succeed on the inside. Both those guys, I'm really interested to see how those situations play out in the coming days and coming weeks, because once we get out there for fall camp, those are guys who can be real game changers in the middle of this defense. And speaking of game changers, there are going to be some Husky alumni at the NFL level that are going to have some monster seasons. Now, I know that the NFL is not something for all my everydayers out there. I've talked with a lot of them where it's, oh, hey, I just love UW football. And once they go on to the NFL, it's cool to see guys have some success, but it's not something I'm following very closely. I totally get it. I'm just 100% different in that regard. I absolutely love everything to do with the NFL. And I think NFL success for Husky alumni is something that can be so important because it's still really cool when, guys like Michael Penix, Rome Odunze, they all come back to Montlake. They're going to be revered no matter what. But when they've got that a bit of extra NFL success under their belt as well, that's something that Jedd Fisch, whoever the head coach is down the line, can always use to sell the program moving forward, because that's something that spans everyone. It doesn't matter who it is. I got 4 guys I want to talk about here. No matter who their head coach was at Washington, they are still Huskies, and that's still something you can use to sell the program and just give it more exposure across the country. With that being said, the first guy I want to talk about is absolutely, without a doubt, Rome Odunze. He's someone who I know I've talked about him a lot when I've done a couple other segments like this, because I am so excited for what he's going to bring to the table this season. I do believe he's going to make the Pro Bowl this year, and I've said it before, I want to make sure it is on record right now that Rome Odunze will go over 1,000 yards this season, and he will have 8+ touchdowns in 2025 with Caleb Williams, thanks to Ben Johnson as his head coach. And this is something that boils down to a couple simple factors for me. One, he's got a real head coach now. For any Seahawk fans out there, you know what it's like having Shane Waldron as an offensive coordinator. The guy didn't want to watch film. There's so many rumors that have come out about how just unfortunate it was for this combination of top 10 picks in Caleb and Rome to have a guy like that running the offense. Now with Ben Johnson, that's not going to be the case. Number 2, it's very simple. Keenan Allen is not in the building anymore. I know that the Bears went out and used their first 2 draft picks on pass catchers. They used the 10th overall pick on Colston Loveland and their first second round pick, on Luther Burden, the wide receiver from Missouri, to really fill out this offense. And it is a high-powered offense with lots of weapons. But behind DJ Moore, I think Rome Odunze is going to develop into, at the very worst, the number 2 option this season. I think there's a world where he overtakes DJ Moore and becomes the number 1 option on this team. He was 3rd on this team in every category last year outside of touchdowns, where he was 4th with 53 catches for 734 yards and 3 touchdowns. And with 30 extra targets and a real coach in front of him, plus an improved offensive line to help out Caleb Williams, who took a league-high 70 sacks last season, I think he's going to take a huge leap forward. 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, and the Pro Bowl. Now let's talk about a couple other guys. One of them was Rome's teammate, who I also think is going to make the Pro Bowl, in Baltimore Ravens right tackle Roger Rosengarten, who was just nothing short of stellar. During his first season at the NFL level, I was so impressed with what he brought to the table, where this was a guy who I feel like some people out there forget. During spring practice last year, I was walking off the field with some wonderful friends of the program, Alex Katz and Ben Glassmeyer, and we were watching a couple of people walk onto the field, and one of them was San Francisco 49ers general manager John Lynch. And we were very intrigued because all of a sudden Roger walked onto the field and was getting ready for a workout. So it's one of those things where we saw how highly touted he was. I know they did a wonderful mock draft over at Huskies Wire last year that placed Roger Rosengarten in the first round to the 49ers, and he fell to the end of the second round. And 1 pick before the Niners wanted to grab him, the Ravens swooped in and did so. And since taking over, again, week 4 last year as the starting right tackle, he has been nothing short of spectacular. He shut down TJ Watt. He shut down Myles Garrett, some of the best defensive players in the league. Roger Rosengarten was one of the best offensive linemen in the league last year. From the time that he took over through the end of the season, I believe he won some kind of all-rookie nomination. I know there are several outlets out there who do those, but I believe he won at least one of those nominations. And this season, I expect him to take another step forward, and I expect him to be a Pro Bowl caliber player. And playing on the Ravens offensive line is one thing, but having this, just some of the other players on the roster that he does, like Lamar Jackson, like Derrick Henry, it's just going to help him elevate his game even further. And if the Ravens can continue to play at the high level they were last season, this is something that's going to do nothing but elevate everybody else on the roster. And if Roger can help pave the way for spectacular rushing seasons for both of those guys once again, that's something that should help him out in the long run as well, because I look around the AFC and there are some really strong offensive linemen, but with what Roger showed as a rookie, and so then he said during Ravens OTAs a few months ago that he's going to come into the season playing with more confidence. I think it's something where, especially with what Washington fans got to know of seeing him throughout the 2022 and 2023 seasons, if he takes a step forward after playing at the high level he did last year, that's a Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber player. Now, with that being said, let's talk about a guy who I think deserves all-pro recognition. My favorite player in UW history, defensive tackle Vita Vea with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Vita was stellar last season. It was great to see him get a late nod to the Pro Bowl, his second career Pro Bowl nomination after putting up a career-high 7 sacks, and he also put up a career-high in pressures last season as well. And this is someone who he got featured on the NFL Top 100 list for the first time in his NFL career, which was really cool to see because that's something that's voted on by all the other players in the league, and seeing Vita on there as someone who, I know some people just know him as a nose tackle, but a guy who, when he's on the field, Tampa Bay gives up 1 yard less on average on the ground with him on the field compared to when he's off. It's 4.9 yards per carry versus 3.9. That is a massive difference. And combining that with, which was what made him my favorite player at Washington, the fact that even double teaming him can be impossible at times because he still finds ways to get to the quarterback and create havoc. Watching all that is so much fun. And I think after what he did last season, continuing to build on that this year, I don't want to say it's a certainty, but it's something that I certainly expect of him because he is just that level of talent. And when you look around on the rest of that defensive line, there's so many other players there that command attention that you can't just double team Vita on every single play. And when he gets those one-on-one matchups, especially in the pass game, he's going to win them more often than not. And combining that with some of those advanced stats that you can get into in the run game outside of just yards per carry on the impact that he brings when he's on the field, that's really important as well. And then on top of that, this is a guy who head coach Todd Bowles is known for some of the exotic looks that he can give on defense. And it's one thing where we saw it at a couple different points last season where he'll drop into coverage. I know there's a highlight reel play of him from last season laying out Dallas Cowboys tight end Terrence Ferguson. And just having somebody like that can do a little bit of everything. I know there are a couple of plays from the playoffs a few years ago where he lined up at inside linebacker. Like, that's just the caliber of athlete that Vita is. And if Todd Bowles can do a couple of those other things to showcase just how valuable he is in this defense, I feel like another Pro Bowl and another All-Pro nomination are well within the range of possibilities for Vita this upcoming season. Now, speaking of All-Pros, I want to talk about one more guy before we get out of here, and that's a guy who already has 2 All-Pro nominations under his belt. First team in 2023, second team in 2024. That's Trent McDuffie. Because one of the big things going around recently is some contract extensions that were handed out to the guys drafted ahead of him in the 2022 NFL draft. That's number 3 overall pick, Derek Stingley, and the number 4 overall pick, Sauce Gardner, who were picked by the Texans and Jets respectively. In the last couple of months, both those guys have gotten lucrative contract extensions, where Sauce Gardner recently broke the record set by Derek Stingley of the highest paid cornerback in terms of average annual value, where he's making $30.1 million a year. So my bold take with Trent McDuffie, it's very simple. Trent McDuffie is going to break that record if he gets a contract extension done at some point before the season. By the time the season rolls around, Trent McDuffie will be the new highest paid cornerback in football. And as any Husky fan will tell you, it is rightfully deserved. This is a guy who, I don't care that he didn't get his first interception until this past season. And then he got one in back-to-back weeks, by the way, which is great to see. I don't care that he's never made the Pro Bowl, even though that is something that factors into contract extensions at different points in time. This is a guy who who, since he stepped on the field as a rookie, has been an absolute difference maker in the secondary. And watching him play every Sunday for the Chiefs is so much fun, because not just did he force 7 forced fumbles in 2023 on his way to that first team All-Pro nomination. Not only is one of the best tacklers and run support guys in the league at cornerback, but he's somebody who locks up the best players in the NFL on a weekly basis. Jamar Chase, Nico Collins, Deebo Samuel, just a few guys that he had to go up against in man coverage last season, and he did a phenomenal job. Some of his advanced numbers are really intriguing as well. With him playing press coverage, I think it's 68% of the time. He also has a rate of allowing separation that's even lower than, I think it's 30% at this point in time, because he just doesn't allow separation even when he's going up against the best players in the league. And that should, if the Kansas City Chiefs can afford it with all the money that they're throwing around, that should result in a lucrative contract extension from the organization. And if they don't want to pay him and they let him hit free agency in a couple of years, I think at that point in time, he will still do the exact same thing and reset the market. There are so many guys that you should keep an eye on this year. I want to throw out an honorable mention because I didn't mention Michael Penix for a reason. I know I made those bold predictions on a previous podcast where he's going to throw for over 4,000 yards, 35 touchdowns this season, and lead the Falcons to the NFC division title. You can go check that one out. As all the everydayers know out there, though, we're all very high on Michael Penix here on this program. One guy that I want to throw out that I think could take a step forward this season in a somewhat reserved role is Ja'Lynn Polk. He's somebody who struggled for a variety of different reasons last year. I think the Patriots threw a lot at him early in a system with a brutal coaching staff, and his confidence really suffered. He dealt with a couple injuries as well. And I think now with a couple of other guys in the building, they drafted Washington State receiver Kyle Williams, who's going to step up and be part of this rotation. They signed Stephon Diggs in free agency. Those guys, along with some veterans like Kayshon Boutte, Kendrick Bourne, there are some players in this room that will take some pressure off of Ja'Lynn Polk. And if he and Drake May can form a nice combination heading into the 2025 season, they can form that chemistry. I really like what Ja'Lynn Polk is going to do. My bold prediction for him is that he's going to score 5+ touchdowns this season. That's all I got for all you everydayers out there today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. It means so much. And with fall camp on the horizon, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.